He said, "We don't keep lazy people." Next day, his CEO dad screamed, "You fired who?" The boardroom was silent except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. It wasn't the kind of silence that accompanies calm deliberation or thoughtful reflection. It was the heavy, oppressive quiet that follows a catastrophic mistake. Marcus Kane stood at the head of the table, his hands gripping its polished surface as though trying to steady himself against an invisible storm. His father, Charles Kane, the towering figure who had built this company from scratch and turned it into one of the most respected names in the industry, was staring at him with an expression that could only be described as horrified disbelief. "You fired who?" Charles barked again, his voice slicing through the tension like a knife. Marcus swallowed hard, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes on him. He had always been confident, even cocky, but now he felt like a child caught stealing cookies. I thought she wasn't pulling her weight," he stammered, hating how weak his voice sounded. "She seemed lazy." "Lazy?" Charles repeated, his tone dripping with incredulity. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Marcus didn't know what to say. How could he explain that he'd acted out of frustration, convinced he was doing the right thing? That he'd seen her sitting quietly at her desk while others scrambled around her, oblivious to the fact that she was orchestrating everything behind the scenes? She hadn't looked busy, not in the way people usually did when they were drowning in work, and so he'd assumed the worst. But none of that mattered now. Not when his father was looking at him like he'd just set fire to the family home. It all started 2 weeks earlier, when Marcus first stepped into the office after completing his MBA. Freshly minted with a degree from one of the most prestigious business schools in the country, he carried himself with the swagger of someone who already knew they were destined for greatness. The internship offers had poured in, but Marcus had chosen to join his father's company instead. Why wouldn't he? This wasn't just any corporation, it was the Kane Enterprises, a name synonymous with innovation and success. And besides, working here meant proving himself under the watchful eye of the man whose approval he craved more than anything else. From day one, Marcus made it clear that he intended to shake things up. He arrived early, stayed late, and peppered meetings with bold ideas about streamlining operations and cutting costs. At first, his enthusiasm was met with polite nods and murmurs of encouragement. But soon enough, cracks began to show. Marcus struggled to connect with the employees, many of whom had been with the company for years. They found him aloof, dismissive, and overly critical. To them, he was just another entitled rich kid playing at being a leader. Still, Marcus refused to let their opinions get to him. If anything, their resistance fueled his determination to prove them wrong. He decided to take matters into his own hands by conducting what he called a performance audit. Essentially, it involved walking around the office, observing people, and making snap judgments about their productivity. It wasn't exactly scientific, but Marcus believed he had a knack for spotting inefficiency. That was how he ended up focusing on Eleanor Harper. Eleanor was easy to overlook. She sat in a corner cubicle tucked away from the hustle and bustle of the main floor. Her desk was neat but not obsessively so, adorned with a small potted plant and a framed photo of her daughter. Unlike some of her colleagues, who wore their stress like badges of honor, Eleanor exuded an almost serene calmness. She rarely raised her voice, never rushed, and seemed content to let others take center stage. To Marcus, she looked like someone who coasted through her days without breaking a sweat. He noticed her during his second week on the job. While everyone else scrambled to meet deadlines or fielded frantic phone calls, Eleanor sat quietly at her desk, typing away on her computer. Occasionally, she would pick up her phone to respond to emails or scribble something down in a notebook, but there was no sense of urgency in her movements. No frantic tapping of fingers or furrowed brows. Just stillness. At first, Marcus thought maybe she was new. Maybe she didn't understand the pressure everyone else was under. But when he asked HR about her, they told him she'd been with the company for over a decade. A decade. Surely someone with that much experience should be contributing more, shouldn't they? Shouldn't they be leading teams or spearheading projects? Instead, Eleanor seemed content to fade into the background. Over the next few days, Marcus kept a close eye on her. He stopped by her desk once or twice, feigning casual curiosity about her workload. Each time, she greeted him politely, offering concise updates on whatever tasks she happened to be working on. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing that screamed, indispensable employee. In fact, the more Marcus observed her, the more convinced he became that she was holding the team back. And then came the incident that sealed her fate. One afternoon, Marcus walked past Eleanor's desk and saw her scrolling through what appeared to be social media. He paused, narrowing his eyes. Was she seriously wasting company time on Facebook? Before he could confront her, she glanced up and gave him a warm smile. Just taking a quick break, she said softly, as if reading his mind. Long day. Her nonchalance infuriated him. Here she was, lounging around while everyone else worked themselves to the bone, and she had the audacity to act like it was no big deal. That was it. He'd seen enough. Later that evening, Marcus marched into his father's office, brimming with righteous indignation. Dad, I need to talk to you about something, he announced, planting himself in the chair across from Charles's desk. Charles looked up from the report he was reading, raising an eyebrow. What is it? It's about one of your employees, Marcus began, leaning forward. Her name's Eleanor Harper. I don't think she's pulling her weight. Honestly, I'm not sure why we're keeping her around. Charles frowned, setting the report aside. Eleanor? Are you sure about this? Yes, Marcus replied firmly. I've been watching her. She's slow, disengaged, and frankly, lazy. We can't afford to carry dead weight, Dad. Not if we want to stay competitive. For a moment, Charles studied his son, searching for some sign that Marcus might be joking. But the younger man's expression was resolute, bordering on smug. Finally, Charles sighed. All right, Marcus. If you're certain, then handle it. But make sure you're absolutely sure before you do anything drastic. With those words ringing in his ears, Marcus left the office feeling vindicated. For the first time since starting at the company, he felt like he was truly stepping into his role as a leader. Tomorrow, he would speak to Eleanor and give her the ultimatum, shape up or ship out. Either way, he was confident he was making the right decision. The next morning, Marcus approached Eleanor's desk with a clipboard in hand, ready to deliver his verdict. She looked up as he approached, her expression unreadable. Good morning, Mr. Kane, she said, her voice steady. Morning, Eleanor, Marcus replied, forcing a tight smile. Can we talk for a moment? Of course. She gestured to the chair beside her desk, but Marcus shook his head. Actually, let's step into the conference room. Privacy. A flicker of unease crossed her face, but she nodded and followed him without protest. Once inside, Marcus closed the door and turned to face her. Eleanor, I'll cut straight to the point. I've been reviewing performance metrics across the department, and frankly, I'm concerned about your contributions. Her brow furrowed slightly. My contributions? Yes. From what I've observed, you're not keeping pace with the rest of the team. You seem distracted, disengaged. And yesterday, I saw you browsing social media during work hours. Eleanor blinked, clearly taken aback. Mr. Kane, I assure you, my work has always been on time and to standard. If there's a specific issue you'd like to discuss. There's no need to sugarcoat it, Marcus interrupted, his tone sharp. I'm giving you a chance to improve. Starting today, I expect to see measurable results. Otherwise, he trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Eleanor stared at him for a long moment, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then, without saying another word, she gathered her belongings and walked out of the room. By the end of the day, she had submitted her resignation letter. When Charles arrived at the office the following morning, he was immediately summoned to an emergency meeting. As he entered the boardroom, he was greeted by a chorus of panicked voices. Charles, we have a problem. What happened to Eleanor? She left. Confused, Charles scanned the room until his gaze landed on Marcus. What's going on? He demanded. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I may have fired Eleanor. Charles froze, his face draining of color. You what? She wasn't performing, Marcus explained quickly, though his confidence was beginning to waver. I gave her a warning, and she quit. For a moment, Charles simply stared at him, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might shatter. Then, without warning, he slammed his fist onto the table. Do you have any idea what you've done? Marcus flinched. Dad, No, Marcus, you listen to me. Charles snapped, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. Eleanor Harper is the backbone of this entire company. Without her, we're sunk. The room fell silent, every pair of eyes fixed on Charles. Even Marcus, who had prided himself on his unshakable self-assurance, felt a chill run down his spine. What had he done? As Charles launched into an explanation of Eleanor's true role within the company, Marcus listened in stunned silence. The woman he had dismissed as lazy and disengaged was, in reality, the glue holding everything together. She managed relationships with key clients, streamlined internal processes, and ensured that every project ran smoothly, even if no one else realized it. Her quiet demeanor masked a brilliance that few could match, and her absence would leave a void that couldn't easily be filled. By the time Charles finished speaking, Marcus felt sick to his stomach. He had made a grave mistake, one that could cost the company dearly. But as he sat there, grappling with the enormity of his error, he couldn't help but wonder, would Eleanor ever forgive him? And more importantly, could he find a way to make things right? Days turned into weeks, and the fallout from Marcus's decision became painfully clear. Projects stalled, client complaints piled up, and morale plummeted. Employees whispered bitterly about the new boss, who didn't understand the value of teamwork. Meanwhile, Marcus threw himself into damage control, desperate to undo the mess he had created. But no matter how hard he tried, nothing seemed to work. Then one evening, as he sifted through old files in search of answers, Marcus stumbled upon something unexpected, a folder labeled Eleanor's Notes. Curious, he opened it and began to read. What he found inside changed everything. Each document was meticulously organized, detailing strategies, insights, and solutions for challenges the company had faced over the years. There were drafts of presentations Eleanor had prepared, feedback she had given to colleagues, and even personal messages of encouragement she had written to struggling team members. Reading through them, Marcus realized just how much she had sacrificed to keep the company running smoothly, all while remaining invisible to those around her. Tears welled in his eyes as guilt overwhelmed him. He had judged Eleanor based on appearances, dismissing her because she didn't fit his narrow definition of success. Now he understood the depth of his mistake, and the enormity of the task ahead. Determined to set things right, Marcus devised a plan. It wouldn't be easy, and it certainly wouldn't erase the pain he had caused. But if there was even the slightest chance of redemption, he owed it to Eleanor, and to himself to try. Little did he know, however, that Eleanor had plans of her own. Plans that would force Marcus to confront not only his actions, but also the person he wanted to become. The weight of Eleanor's absence pressed down on Kane Enterprises like a storm cloud that refused to dissipate. Marcus had spent countless hours poring over her notes, trying to piece together the intricate web of connections and systems she had so effortlessly maintained. It was humbling and infuriating to realize just how much he hadn't understood about the company his father had built. The more he read, the more he saw not just Eleanor's brilliance but also her quiet strength. She wasn't merely an employee, she was the pulse of the organization, the steady heartbeat that kept everything alive. But as Marcus worked tirelessly to fill the void she left behind, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was fighting a losing battle. Processes slowed to a crawl, clients grew impatient, and morale among employees plummeted further with each passing day. Even Charles, who rarely lost his temper, began snapping at staff during meetings. The cracks in the foundation of the once thriving company were widening, and no amount of late nights or frantic emails could stop them from tearing it apart. One evening, after another grueling day of attempting and failing to salvage the chaos, Marcus found himself sitting alone in the dimly lit boardroom. His head rested heavily in his hands, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. For the first time since joining the company, he allowed himself to fully confront the reality of what he'd done. Firing Eleanor hadn't been a minor misstep, it had been catastrophic. And yet, despite the overwhelming guilt gnawing at him, there was something else bubbling beneath the surface: determination. He couldn't undo what he'd done, but maybe, just maybe, he could make amends. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the office earlier than usual. He bypassed his desk and headed straight for HR, where he requested access to Eleanor's personnel file. Flipping through the documents, he discovered something surprising: her home address. It wasn't protocol to share such information, but given the circumstances, and the fact that he was the CEO's son, Marcus managed to convince the HR manager to let him take it. That afternoon, armed with nothing but a folder containing copies of Eleanor's notes and a nervous knot in his stomach, Marcus drove to her house. It was a modest suburban home with a neatly trimmed lawn and flower boxes bursting with color. As he stood on the porch, rehearsing what he would say, he felt a pang of doubt. What if she turned him away? What if she refused to listen? Before he could second-guess himself any further, he knocked on the door. A few moments later, it opened to reveal Eleanor herself. Her expression shifted from mild surprise to guarded skepticism as she recognized him. "Mr. Kane," she said coolly, folding her arms across her chest. "What brings you here?" Marcus swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how out of place he looked in his tailored suit standing on her doorstep. "Eleanor, may I come in? I need to talk to you." She hesitated, clearly debating whether to slam the door in his face. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she stepped aside and gestured for him to enter. The inside of her home was warm and inviting, filled with sunlight streaming through lace curtains and the faint scent of lavender. Marcus followed her into the living room, where she gestured for him to sit on the couch. She remained standing, her posture stiff and unyielding. "What do you want?" she asked bluntly, cutting straight to the point. Marcus took a deep breath, clutching the folder tightly in his lap. "I came to apologize," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "What I did, firing you, was wrong. Worse than wrong. It was reckless, arrogant, and completely unforgivable. I judged you based on appearances without taking the time to understand your contributions. I thought you were lazy because you didn't look busy, but now I see that you were doing far more than anyone else realized. You were holding this entire company together." Eleanor listened silently, her expression unreadable. When Marcus paused, she raised an eyebrow. And Marcus faltered, unsure how to continue. "I'm sorry. Truly sorry. I know saying it doesn't fix anything, but I wanted you to hear it directly from me. I also brought these." He held up the folder. "Your notes. They've been helping me understand just how much you did, and how much we're struggling without you." For a long moment, Eleanor simply stared at him. Then slowly, she reached out and took the folder from his hands. Opening it, she flipped through the pages, her lips curving into a faint smile. "You actually read all of this?" she asked, her tone softer now. "Yes," Marcus admitted. "Every word. I don't think I'll ever fully grasp everything you accomplished, but I'm starting to see it. And I can't thank you enough for leaving this behind." Eleanor closed the folder and set it aside, her gaze drifting toward the window. "It's funny," she said quietly. "I always knew people underestimated me. But I never expected someone like you to walk in and assume the worst so quickly." Her words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. "I deserved that," he muttered. "And worse. I acted like I had all the answers when I didn't even know the questions." Eleanor turned back to him, her eyes sharp and piercing. "Why are you really here, Marcus? Is it because you feel guilty? Or is it because you need me to come back and clean up the mess you made?" Her bluntness caught him off guard, but he forced himself to meet her gaze. "Both," he admitted. "I won't lie, I came here hoping you'd consider returning. Not because I think it's easy to forgive me, but because the company needs you. I need you. But more importantly, I want to prove that I've learned from my mistakes. If there's anything I can do to earn your trust again, I'll do it." Eleanor studied him carefully, her expression inscrutable. After a long pause, she sighed and sank into the armchair opposite him. "Let me ask you something," she said. "Do you honestly believe you've changed? Or are you just saying what you think I want to hear?" The question caught Marcus off guard. He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I don't know if I've changed yet," he admitted finally. "But I want to. That's why I'm here, not just to beg for your help, but to start making things right. Starting with you." Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the armrest. "You have no idea how tempting it is to tell you to figure it out yourself," she said, a hint of amusement creeping into her voice. But, Marcus prompted, leaning forward eagerly. "But," Eleanor continued, "the truth is, I care too much about this company to let it fail. And while I don't trust you, not yet, I do believe you mean well. So here's what's going to happen, I'll come back, but only under one condition." "Anything," Marcus said quickly. "Name it." "You're going to work with me," Eleanor replied firmly. "Not above me, not below me, beside me. You'll shadow me, learn everything I do, and take responsibility for fixing the damage you caused. No shortcuts, no excuses. If you can handle that, then maybe, just maybe, we can move forward. Relief washed over Marcus, though he knew better than to show it. Deal, he said, extending his hand. Thank you, Eleanor. You won't regret this. Eleanor shook his hand briefly before pulling away. Don't thank me yet, she said with a wry smile. This is going to be harder than you think. Over the next several weeks, Marcus threw himself into learning everything he could from Eleanor. She assigned him tasks that ranged from menial to mind-bogglingly complex, forcing him to confront the gaps in his knowledge and skill set. At first, he struggled, often frustrated by the sheer volume of work she handled daily. But gradually, he began to see the bigger picture, the intricate tapestry of relationships, processes, and strategies that she had woven together over the years. Through it all, Eleanor remained patient but firm, refusing to coddle him or let him off the hook. She pushed him to think critically, communicate effectively, and prioritize collaboration over control. Slowly but surely, Marcus started to change, not just in how he approached his work, but in how he viewed himself and others. He realized that leadership wasn't about commanding respect, it was about earning it. Meanwhile, the company began to stabilize. With Eleanor back at the helm and Marcus working diligently by her side, projects resumed their normal pace, client satisfaction improved, and morale among employees began to rebound. Though some still harbored resentment toward Marcus, they couldn't deny the effort he was putting in to make amends. One evening, as they wrapped up another long day of work, Marcus found himself lingering in Eleanor's office. She glanced up from her computer, raising an eyebrow. Something on your mind? She asked. I was just thinking, Marcus said, leaning against the doorway. When I first met you, I thought you were lazy. Now I realize you're probably the hardest working person I've ever known. Eleanor chuckled softly. Funny how things turn out, isn't it? It's more than funny, Marcus replied earnestly. It's humbling. I owe you so much, Eleanor. More than I'll ever be able to repay. To his surprise, Eleanor smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes. You're repaying me already, she said. By learning, growing, and becoming the kind of leader this company deserves. That's payment enough. As Marcus left her office that night, he felt a sense of hope he hadn't experienced in months. He still had a long way to go, but for the first time, he believed he was on the right path. And as he walked through the quiet halls of Kane Enterprises, he couldn't help but wonder, what other lessons lay ahead.